Okay, you all good? Let's do it. Hello and welcome to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast.
You're listening to the B2C Lead Gen Podcast. My name is Daniel Hopewell here with Simon Delaney, and this is episode 66. Get as close to the sale as you possibly can. We're going to explain exactly what we mean by that in the context of lead gen throughout the course of this podcast. But before we do, Simon, what's the point of this podcast? I mean, this specific podcast, not like in a general sense. What's the point of this podcast?
So what's the point of life? Yeah.
What's the point of today's podcast? What are we talking about?
I was told a long time ago when I first probably starting, I can't even remember who it was by, but I respected them highly. It wasn't someone that I worked with, I don't think. It was someone externally who said to me, in lead generation, always get as close to the sale as you possibly can. And that stuck with me ever since. And I've obviously been doing lead generation and stuff, around it, being a publisher and a buyer and a brand and now software. And most of the success that I see in lead generation specifically, as in before it goes into the sales function, is where the lead generator is getting as close to the sale as they possibly can, and where the lead buyer is buying leads that are, easy to convert. Yeah.
So we'll talk through this in two perspectives: from the perspective of the lead buyer also from the lead perspective, and we'll be relatively agnostic in what we're pushing forward. We're going to talk about the pros and cons of each idea, but before we do that, I think it's worth kind of discussing the fact that, we've used this phrase before, not all leads are created equal. There's a spectrum of intent, and before we go into sort of saying as close to the sale, we need to sort of establish what we mean by that, like different types of leads and where in the spectrum, certain leads are. So what do we mean by that?
Okay, so let's just quickly touch on the spectrum. So we won't cover everything, but we'll just, the most well-known stuff. So effectively, you have a marketing qualified lead. So this could be an email address, could be a telephone number as well, but it's a person who isn't necessarily expecting to be contacted about a sale. What they're expecting is information or value or a solution to their problem or more information before they start making a decision. These are leads that you would typically nurture. But if you think about it, what's actually happening is when someone is a marketing qualified lead, you're still trying to get them as close to the sale as you possibly can. You're trying to nurture them to that point. Then you have purchasing intent leads. So these could be leads that have filled a form in, come into a sales function, but then the salesperson has to ask them a 20-minute questionnaire of information before they can get them pushed to the point of a conversion. So, for example, anyone that's bought a house, anyone that's taken out insurance, and you filled a form in, energy, mobile, a lot of the time, broadband, you go in, you put some base details in, some generic information about your gender and whatever else. And then you have a 20-30 minute conversation about all the other details. And then there's a third type, which is all that information that you're getting asked as part of the sales function. Imagine that happens in the lead generation process. So your form fill becomes the form that normally would be a 10-20 minute call with a salesperson. And then you submit at that point, and the salesperson basically just has to get the sale done because they have all the information. They're just clarifying it. So that's the sort of spectrum that we're potentially talking about for leads getting as close to the sale as you possibly can.
And if we start looking at that as in the leads that are closest, is the last point that is almost essentially as close as you can possibly be. Like they come through and they're just ready to be sold to. So with that in mind, let's start from the perspective of the buyers. If they're buying leads that are as close to the sale as possible, what are the benefits of that? I guess what are the cons of that? So if you want to do both.
So if you're buying leads that are as close to the sale as possible, what it actually does is just massively reduce your sales operating costs. So let's say that we're talking about call centers, right? So the leads are going to go into a sales team because they're relatively high ticket items. Person wants to speak to someone, have that sort of personal touch and feel they're making the right decision. If you've got 20 people sat in a room of a call center receiving leads in, and each one's getting X amount of money, you're just reducing that cost massively, because either you don't need as many people, the time they spend on the phone is massively reduced, they can actually take more leads in, convert more per hour. So it's all to do with reducing your overheads from a sales perspective. The cons, I suppose, are you have a reduced sales force. I don't know if that's particularly a con.
I just mean a con, but I mean, there must be a reason why people don't do it. So let's, is it just that the initial cost seems higher?
Yeah, I think
that's a false economy, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's the fear that if you're buying leads externally from a lead generator and you're a lead buyer, I wonder if being the lead buyer, you feel a loss of control potentially over the lead if most of the work is being done in advance and you're just converting the lead. Could be one of them. The other is, ensuring that all the information you've got is correct. Do you want to be more in control of that process rather than an external party sending you those leads? This is like a sort of trust thing, because a lot of the companies that do these sort of things have online forms that people can switch on anyway, or get as close to the sale as possible. Whereas with external lead generators, they very rarely do it.
So how do you work with lead generators then, to flip it around?
Well, the closer you get to the sale, the more money there is. Because for exactly the same reason that it benefits the lead buyer is there's reduced sales operating costs. So you can use that money to put towards the lead generation function. So the CPL will be higher, you will earn more money. The con is that you're not going to get as many leads, because obviously
is it harder as well?
It's potentially harder. I mean, in a sense. So let's imagine you've got a form fill with like 6 questions on it, and then you're going to create a form fill with 20 questions on it. Each step of a question, you've got a potential drop off, and people measure this and look at drop off percentages and whatever else. But it's about gaining the intent of the user right from the off. And this is why if you're going to go like heavy intent lead gen, let's call it that, where you're getting as close to the sale as possible, the top of the funnel marketing is incredibly important, more important than potentially anything else, because you've got to be making sure that you're hitting your ideal customer profiles, hitting them with a value proposition that they potentially can't resist, ensuring that they're going to go through this process, that they want to go through this process. So yeah, you have less leads, but a higher CPL.
I feel like, although we're trying to look at this neutrally, we're kind of leaning towards, I mean, the title itself leads towards the idea that maybe you should go for these kind of leads, but there must be a sort of an issue or a disconnect, I guess, between marketing and sales that can override this or make this not work as well as perhaps. I'm trying to give the opposite side, or like trying to sort of talk through it and not be too sort of biased in how we're presenting this. But if marketing and sales aren't working together in the way they should, is that not an issue? Does that not stop this working as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think if your sales and marketing team aren't working well together, and by marketing team we mean external lead generator, it probably won't work, because you're just going to be misaligned on expectations. The sales team will have like a mistrust of the leads that are coming in. You've got to remember as well, a lot of lead generators are put under pressure of like, we want more leads. So if you're going after less leads but with huge intent, and someone's forcing you constantly to get more leads, it can be quite difficult. So they need to work incredibly closely together, and understand exactly what the expectations are. I mean, the way I'd run it is actually I'd give the user a choice. So when they come into a site, you could ask some base information like you would do normal lead generation, and then ask the user, do you want a phone call now, or do you want to complete X, Y, and Z online? And that way, it's like pushing their intent one way or the other anyway. And the sales team is still getting what they would have got. And if not, they're just getting much higher intent leads. But you rarely see anyone do this. And there's another issue in it. I've experienced this so a lot of buyers, depending on how big the company is, they can't necessarily cope with more information being sent them because the CRM or the dialer or whatever that they use to receive leads isn't aligned to the information that could be inputted from like an API externally, and they need a salesperson to be inputting it. So that's another thing, you'd have to make sure that all the technology was aligned. Because for example, we've done it in the past when we used to generate leads, and we'd be like, we can ask all this additional information and get it. And the client would be like, yeah, but we can't handle it. You coming in, it needs to be the person at the phone call entering it. And we'd be like, okay, but it just makes no sense. So there's always like alignment points around marketing operations, marketing and sales being aligned, and the user just getting the experience that's best for them as well.
And I think as well, you've sort of answered my question there, but when you think about, it's how you measure success, I guess. Like, it's the thing about the metrics too that you're using to measure success. Like, if from a marketing perspective, if you're only really caring about the leads because that's your job done, like, you're not going to be that bothered about making an effort to make the leads any better. However, if you're measuring success in terms of sales, then you will be doing. I guess it's kind of what it comes back to, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I genuinely think you want to be as close to the sale as you can possibly get within all the parameters that exist. And whether that's, the client can't accept additional information via an API or whatever, purely because that's really what great lead generation is about, is like proving the intent of this individual. Now, I'm not talking about marketing qualified leads and, stuff that you can't really influence. But if you're going after a purchasing intent lead and you want to get the highest CPL and do some great marketing to people that fit like the ideal customer profile, do some great messaging, positioning, and build a lead generation brand if you're a lead generation company, I think you'd really, really set yourselves apart from absolutely everybody else if you push these leads to the client at the point where it's literally like a conversion like that. And it's not, I don't think every lead needs to be like that, because they won't. I'd give the user an option. But it's not difficult. This is just like additional information, right? Like, you can get it from a client just by ringing them up. So if you, I don't know, let's say you're doing life insurance, and everyone that does life insurance lead gen asks the same series of questions, right? Every single form is virtually exactly the same. It's just the layout of it that's different. But let's say they ask, how much do you want to insure, and over what tenure, and are you a smoker or whatever else. When that lead's submitted, that person then gets 20, 30 other questions. If I'm a lead generator, I just listen to those 20, 30 other questions. I might even cherry pick out of them ones that I think that could be like, we could really use, especially at the beginning of the form, where you're moving an individual that isn't necessarily putting in personal information, but is almost going through like a survey of what, like, segment of an audience they fit into. I think that's a great way for a lead generator to get more aligned with the sales process. But obviously the buyer has to buy into this as well. I'd be interested to find out what buyers think of that, actually, whether they would want that. I can't see why not, but maybe there's a reason.
We'll ask one next time around.
Yeah.
Okay, so at this point, I would normally try and sort of summarize what we've done. We've talked through in the podcast, but today I'm going to actually flip it and let you do this, Simon. People listen to this. What is the take-home message you want to give them? Like the end of the podcast, like, if they have to remember sort of 1, 2 things that you think, right, I'm going to go away, this bit of advice is a bit of value, what would you say?
Okay, so if you're going to drive leads to as close to a sale as they can possibly get as part of the lead generation process, I'd say 3 points. Number one, your top of funnel marketing, the ads need to be like really on point, and the targeting to the audience need to be really on point, because you've got to get people that have like an interest in this product or service or solution that's being offered. Number two would be, you have to give the users the choice. So what I'd have is normal form at the end of it, rather than like the thank you page. I'd have 2 buttons, and it'd say something like complete the rest of the form online, or speak to a salesperson, or speak to, you know, an assistant or something. And then the user just chooses, and the lead gets submitted at that point. And that is just putting the incentive entirely in their hands, whether they carry out that process. And the third is, it's incredibly important, as we touched on, that sales and marketing are really aligned on this, and the expectations are set. You know, when sales get them, they need to be like crystal clear about like the conversion rates of each type of lead, what works better, what doesn't work. Feedback loops need to be put in place, so that everyone can measure exactly what impact this has, because otherwise it'll just kill it dead, and everyone would just go back to like the normal way of doing it.
Nice one, nicely done. That was very concise and better than I would have come up with, for sure. Nice one, Simon. That's episode 66. Get as close to the sale as you possibly can.
Thanks for listening to the B2C Lead Generation podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe to hear more from those at the very cutting edge of the lead gen world.